So we're looking at the fifth objection that's usually raised against dispensationalism, which is that dispensationalists divide up the Bible, they destroy the unity of the Bible. So far we've examined, this is the fifth objection. We looked at the objection that dispensationalists teach two ways of salvation, that we have a view that's really too new to be true, that we only care about the end times, that we're date setters, and finally again here that we divide up the Bible and destroy its unity. So let's examine this a little bit more detail. We're going to look at this whole notion of dividing the Bible, as well as ask the question whether these divisions are actually supported by the Bible itself. So, little story here. When I first started going to Dallas Seminary, I was working and I had a co-worker, and I told him, of course, a conversation that I was a student at Dallas Seminary, and his initial reaction, I mean, right out of his mouth was, "Oh, those are the guys who chop up the Bible." So that's what he knew Dallas Seminary as, a place where we're taught to chop up the Bible, is destroy its unity. And as we look at this, we'll see again, which is so often happens with objections to dispensationalism, is that the accusation is really not made against dispensationalism itself, but rather against a caricature of it or a straw man. Our critics simply just do not take the time to understand what we really hold to and believe. Let me demonstrate that by this quote I took from the Monergism website. I left the URL there so you can go look it up yourself. It's a discussion of dispensationalism and doctrinal unity, and the doctrine of unity of Scripture. It said that higher criticism divides the Scripture up into documents which differ from or contradict one another. The dispensationalism divides the Bible up into dispensations, which differ from or even contradict one another. And so radical is this view, as viewed by the extremists, that the Christian of today who accepts the dispensational view finds the Bible, that is the part that's directly intended for him, shrunk to the compass of the imprisonment epistles. That's 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. Well, look what they do here in this discussion. Number one, they've made higher criticism. That's the view that the Bible was compiled from 4 different sources, JEDP, over a long period of time and edited together. That view, that higher critical view, which has been dismissed, is made functionally equivalent to dispensationalism, that they are functionally equivalent sorts of approaches to Scripture. Also point out that higher criticism is generally associated with liberal forms of Christianity. So there's kind of a liberalism taint that's associated with dispensationalism, by that making them functionally equivalent. Talk about the critical or radical view. So radical is this view by the extremist. What he's talking about there is he's talking about ultra-dispensationalism. Dispensationalists that see the beginning of the church in early Acts, mid-Acts, late Acts, instead of Acts chapter 2. The extremist is the view that the Christian of today who accepts the dispensational view. Notice he doesn't say there who accepts the ultra-dispensational view or accepts the radical dispensational view, but just that he accepts the dispensational view, finds his Bible shrunk down to him, meaning that dispensationalism means that only small parts of the Bible are actually relevant for the Christian today. I guess the idea would be that the rest is just filler. The rest is not important. So again, what's going on here is I think that the criticism is being brought, if you can call it that, is being brought against a form of dispensationalism that really the mainline dispensationalist would deny as well. So also, let me show you a video here from took from the internet. A little bit more measured criticism. I'll give him that credit. A little bit more measured sort of criticism, but I think he understands the implications quite well.
So, a lot of the differences between that reading of scripture and, for example, a covenant theological reading of scripture, whether Baptistic or Paedo-Baptistic, would really come down to that difference of continuity, discontinuity. And, so a lot of the differences that you'll find when you're talking to dispensationalists will be things like, do you believe that the promises to Israel are given to the church in some meaningful way? The promises and patterns of blessing and cursing and a lot of these things. Dispensationalist has to say no. Those aren't for you in the same way. Those are for Israel. Because they're expecting at any time for this cataclysmic great tribulation to happen, they don't really believe that the church age is the age where we're going to see the fulfillment of these promises in any sense. Christ reigning from sea to sea, to the rivers to the end of the earth. They don't see that as being about this time in history. So if you go to a dispensationalist and you say, Christ is reigning as king over all of the earth, they'll say, not yet. Not yet. He will, and he's reigning in heaven right now, and they might even say something similar to the amillennial. He has spiritual authority, but he's not aiming to fulfill those promises right now. That's happening in the future. So that discontinuity does introduce quite a few problems. I'm trying to be charitable to the dispensationalists and not just dunk on them, but
We'll just stop there. I think he understands the implication quite well. I mean, he recognizes that from a dispensational perspective, because we do see divisions in the Bible, we do believe that the kingdom is not now, that there is a universal kingdom that God reigns over, but there's not a theocratic kingdom here on the earth that's coming. We also recognize that the promises made to Israel were made to Israel, not made to the church. And they're not being fulfilled in the church today. They will be fulfilled for Israel in the future. Everybody, I think, understands that there's differences in the Bible. I've got my Bible here right in front of me. And if I turn to the table of contents and open it to there, I see what? Some divisions. The Old Testament and the New Testament. In fact, we could say that anybody who did not bring an animal to sacrifice at church on Sunday recognizes some changes happened, that there's some division in the Bible, that a change has happened. A change in the way that God deals with the world. That he deals with man. And we could just, through a reading of the Bible and a reflection on that reading, identify the fact that there's differences between now, the time we're living in biblically right now, and how Christ is going to rule in the millennium, so that when Isaiah chapter 2 says that the nations will be streaming to Zion in order to receive the judgments of the king and learn his law, we know that's not happening today. And an amillennialist or a postmillennialist brother might say that it's happening in a spiritual sense, or that it will happen as the world becomes more Christian. But if we take it literally, we have to say it's not happening now. Same thing with Isaiah chapter 11. It says that Israel is going to be gathered from the nations to which it's been exiled. They're going to be safe from their enemies. There's going to be unity between the northern and southern kingdom. You have to say that that's really not happening now. So the difference between now and what was going to happen in the millennium, between now and what life was like under the Mosaic law. Again, we didn't bring a sacrifice to church on Saturday or Sunday. There's a difference between what was going on under the Mosaic law and what happened before the law. There was a difference there, and a difference between life before the fall and after the fall. Where dispensationalism recognizes these differences that are apparent in the Bible and puts names on them, like the millennial kingdom, or law in the church. Post-fall to Moses. Pre-fall, we'd call that the age of innocence. So we just look at these apparent divisions that are in the Bible, clearly seen, and already they account for what the dispensationalists would call 5 dispensations. So again, dispensationalism is not imposing these divisions on the Bible, but draws them from the Bible. And again, these are things that are recognized if you take a literal interpretation to the Bible. Even our critics recognize that. Floyd Hamilton, writing in his book, The Basis of the Millennial Faith, says that we must frankly admit that the literal interpretation of the Old Testament prophecies gives us just such a picture of the earthly reign of the Messiah as the premillennialist pictures. In other words, if I can paraphrase that a little bit, if we read the Bible literally, if we read the Old Testament prophecies literally, that we get a millennial kingdom, we get a millennial dispensation, just as we describe it. Same thing with O.T. Alice, a vocal critic. I think he's gone to be with the Lord, but a vocal critic of dispensationalism now, said when he was alive, said the Old Testament prophecies, if literally interpreted, cannot be regarded as having been yet fulfilled, or as capable of fulfillment in this present age. So during the time of the church, we can't say that these prophecies from the Old Testament are being fulfilled in any way. And Lorraine Botner, more prominent, I believe he's postmillennialist, says that if generally agreed, if the prophecies are taken literally, they do foretell a restoration of the nation of Israel in the land of Palestine, with the Jews having a prominent place in that kingdom and ruling over other nations, which is just the situation that we see in a dispensational description of the millennial kingdom. So it really comes down to what's called our hermeneutic, the art and science of biblical interpretation, how we apply rules of biblical interpretation. The real difference results from that itself. And again, dispensationalism, one of the tenets, insists on a consistent literal interpretation of the whole Bible. Now, again, seeing differences in the Bible, seeing divisions, it's not just a dispensationalist pastime. Covenant theology proposes 2 or 3 covenantal relationships, a works, redemption, and grace. We've talked about this before. I have a previous video that describes the basic tenets of covenant theology, but they see differences as well. And I'd say that both in the covenant theology and dispensational theology, we see divisions not destroying the unity of the Bible, but both covenantal and dispensational theologians see these divisions providing unity to the Bible, pulling together the whole meta-narrative of the Bible, not imposing divisions, and as the Monergism website implied, creating contradictions between them. So to sum up, we can say that dispensationalists recognize from the Bible itself that there are different ways that God relates to man, and that these are apparent, they're inescapable. These differences or these dispensations provide not a set of contradictory time periods or periods of ways that God deals with man, but instead provides a unifying framework for the whole biblical narrative. And then it recognizes that these divisions are apparent in the Bible. Now, us and covenant theologians might disagree on exactly what they are, what these divisions are, and what's the basis for these divisions, but we would both see that these divisions exist. So to say that this is somehow a flaw or a problem in dispensational theology, I think, again, is really disingenuous. I think it doesn't recognize the fact that the divisions exist, they're real, everyone recognizes them, and they in no way destroy the unity of the Bible.